And we're good. All right, morning, everybody. So, yes, we've been going through the Beatitudes, and now we have reached Matthew 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. So, I've titled this teaching as Making Peace as a Way of Life. So, not making peace a way of life, but making peace as a way of life. So, that gives a little bit of clue of what we'll talk about here. But getting right into it, so just doing a quick look at the verse itself. So Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." So the first things that just come out right out of the gate to consider, blessed, just from my quick word study, just means happy. So I think a lot of us want to be happy, and a lot of us maybe think, well, happiness isn't the purpose of life. But when Jesus tells us, here's a way where you can be happy, why not go for it, right? And so, called the sons of God. So we've got this concept here that if we are being peacemakers, then we will have the name or the designation of being related to God. So kind of the idea that you fit in the family, you represent the family, you give a visual, just show people what it's like to be part of the family of God, I guess. So peacemakers are going to be happy, and they're going to bear and display what it is to be a member of the family of God. That's kind of just my first takeaway just from considering that verse. But going deeper, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Maybe someone needs to mute their mic. Who do we got? Yeah. Is anyone else hearing that? All right, well, I'll keep going. Is anyone else hearing that? I'm getting like a buzzing in the background. Anyway, all right, so continuing on.
Yeah, it comes and goes, I hear it.
Okay, yeah, so what is peace? So just doing a study on that because we need to know what peace is if we're going to be peacemakers. So just some quick definitions here. The normal, non-warring condition of a nation, group of nations, or the world. So not war going on. The state of mutual harmony between people or groups, especially in personal relationships, so trying to live at peace with your neighbors. The normal freedom from civil commotion and violence of a community, so order and security. Cessation of or freedom from strife or dissension. Freedom of the mind from annoyance, distraction, anxiety, or an obsession, things like that. This one I find very interesting, and we're going to go into that a little bit. Or peace can be a state of tranquility or serenity. So these are desirable things, right? None of us wants to be in a war zone, involved in a war. We don't want to have strife. We don't want to have dissension. We don't want to be fighting with people. We don't want to have tension with our neighbors or issues with our community and problems and how things are managed. And obviously, we want to have no annoyance, distraction, frustration. We want to have peace. So being a peacemaker means someone who brings these things about, right? So what isn't peace? Because we need to know what it is not as well if we're going to be making what it isn't, right? So agitation, distress, disagreement, discord, disharmony, hate, hating things, hating people, fighting, frustration, being upset, war, and another interesting one, worry. So just kind of consider these concepts here because some of these things, they're part of life. You can't avoid them. It's not like they're never going to happen. You're going to get agitated. There's going to be stress in life. There's going to be feelings of hatred and anger that come up. There's going to be frustration. We're going to get worried. There's going to be disagreement and discord and arguments between people. These are just going to happen. But being a peacemaker is someone who addresses these things, responds to them correctly, and makes peace, right? So, blessed are the peacemakers. We're told that the makers of peace are blessed, right? So another thing, I always like to figure out what is being said, but what isn't being said, right? So we aren't told that the likers of peace or the wishers or the hopers for peace are going to be blessed, are going to be happy. It's the people who are making peace who are going to be blessed, right? So all of us like peace, all of us want peace, all of us enjoy when we have peace, but that isn't what gets us blessing, right? It's the making of peace that actually achieves something. So that's how we get into this situation where we become called the sons of God, or identified, designated as members of the family of God, is when we are making peace, not when we are just, intellectually supporting the concept of peace, desiring peace, being in favor of there being peace, whatever it is. Those things don't matter, right? It's kind of like when we talk in James that it's not just the hearing of the word, but it's the doing of the word that matters, right? So in the sense that it's not just believing that peace is a good idea, but figuring out how you in your own life and your own sphere of influence can do peace, as in make peace. And the fact that peacemakers is the requisite of this concept implies that peace doesn't make itself, right? So if something doesn't make itself and we need to make it, then that's just how it is, right? So just like your food on the table at dinner time doesn't make itself, your bed doesn't make itself, your life goals don't make themselves for you. They don't just show up on paper and say, here's what you should pursue in life. None of this stuff is automatic. And so if we have to make it, we have to consider, well, what is it going to take to make peace, right? And then it goes into, well, what should we focus on when it comes to making peace? Should we be like beauty pageant winners and say, I want world peace. How can I make world peace? Or should we, as Christians, start figuring out ways to create peace within the Christian community? Should we just work on having a peaceful family life, peaceful workplace? Or should we start maybe with our own peace as an individual? So basically what I want to explore is, what is the proper path of seeking peace and pursuing it, as we read in Psalm 34 and as Peter quotes Psalm 34? Because if we're going to be peacemakers, we need to know how to find peace. We need to know how to chase after peace, walk in peace, live in peace, or as I titled it, make peace as a way of life. So, getting into seeking and pursuit. Can somebody be my reader today? I did notice that we do have Mallory on the call, so maybe she can be my my wonderful assistant again. But yeah, Psalm 34, guys. And I want you guys to pay attention as we read this. As Mallory's going through it, keep your ear tuned to commands. So individual commands, things that you can be on a personal level obedient or disobedient to. Keep that in your mind as she's reading.
Whole
and
chapter.
You're free. The whole chapter, yes.
Okay.
You know
Yeah.
my style.
Got it. Okay. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul will make its boast in the Lord. The humble will hear it and rejoice. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces never betrayed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want. The young lions do not lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who desires life and loves length of days, that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. Evil shall slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the soul of his servants, and none of those who take refuge in him will be condemned.
Thank you. Thank you. So, same thing, guys. I don't know how many you identified in there, but if you're still looking at that passage while we're talking through this, I want you guys to think of anything that stands out in there, like I talked about, that's a command, something that is a implied requirement behaviorally, and which one stands out to you? Because we'll talk about this, but basically, when I read Psalm 34, I think of it as something that points out a lot of the normal disruptors of peace that we experience in life, but it doesn't just point them out, it shows what the solution is. So if you're dealing with a situation where something's going on that's breaking peace in your life, then we have a lot of the solutions here in this psalm. And if we're going to be peacemakers, what better place to start than in our own lives, where if we're dealing with a breaking of peace, it makes sense that we need to solve that peace issue before we're going to be able to do anything bigger in the world, right? And we read this section in Psalm 34, 8 through 14, says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints. For those who fear him, there is no want. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who desires life and loves length of days so that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it." So what I see here is that there's commands, and they are in lockstep with seeking and pursuing peace. And we'll talk about this in depth, because when we deal with stress, taking refuge in God should be a means for acquiring peace. Fearing God rather than fearing man or fearing situations we find ourselves in should be a means to acquire peace. Staying away from evil speech and behavior and doing good instead should be a mechanism for acquiring peace, because you have to understand, we're psychological beings, and a lot of our stress and our lack of peace is 100% originating in our heads. Right? We make up stories of what bad things can happen. We make up stories that create emotions because we have unknowns in our lives. And when we let that happen, it really is just a function of us not doing one or all of these things, right? Just think about any time where you were afraid or worried about something, and can that fear and that worry completely take over when you're doing these things, right? And it's interesting too, because when it says keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit, depart from evil and do good, that's interesting to me, because just think, right? Like as Dustin mentioned when he was praying, forgive us for our many mistakes. How bolstered is your confidence when you do bad things and you feel guilty about it before God, right? So keeping your peace is also going to be a function of keeping your righteousness behaviorally in check, right? Because all of us have that same childlike desire to please our parents, to impress our parents, right? And God being our Father, we don't want to displease him. We don't want to offend him. We don't want to make him upset. We don't want him to disapprove of what we're doing. So to have peace in that relationship, there needs to be you keeping that in check, right? If you're misbehaving and doing things that are bad and know that you're sabotaging yourself, whatever it is, how can there be peace when you have that tension in your mind that you're not doing the right thing, you're not behaving properly, and you're creating situations that are negative, right? So it's not just the taking refuge in the fearing of God, but keeping your life in check so that you're not sabotaging your own psychology and feeling bad and guilty and unapproved and all this sort of stuff that breaks your own personal peace. So did you guys open it up really quick? I know we went through that pretty quick, but was there any of the commands in that psalm that kind of stuck out to anybody as we were reading it that just kind of pricked them, made them think? Give a couple minutes here just for anyone to pipe in. Yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
This is a little bit more of a technical point, but if you look at verse 5, this is something that I've noted because some of you know I've translated through the Psalms, and I noticed this in verse 5 that there's I won't get into all the specifics of how the grammar works, but there's an ambiguity in kind of like just a basic verb that would say, like, so in verse 5 it says they looked to him and were radiant, but that both of those verbs of looking to him and being radiant share the same form of the imperative. So it could very well be translated look to him as a command and be radiant. And the interesting thing is that the Septuagint, which is the early Greek translation of the Hebrew, which was ultimately used by early Christians, that's how they interpreted it. And I think the New Revised Standard Version also interpreted it as an imperative. So the point is, as a casual reading in English, you wouldn't know that verse 5 possibly was originally intended also as an imperative. But I think that it kind of helps. It's just a possibility that, if part of the going to Yahweh for refuge is looking to him and being radiant and not looking to other ways of settling your problems, whether that be through military might or through violence or through, argumentation or whatever it might be. So anyway, it's kind of more of a technical point. Hopefully I didn't lose anybody.
No, that's really cool, because that's kind of my whole, that's exactly the aim that I was looking for, is hunting out all the imperatives out of the psalm as actions that we can partake in. So that's super cool that one is like a double whammy kind of hidden in there, because it's very cool. It's interesting. Anybody else before we continue on? Psalm 34, Sergio. All right, well, we'll continue on. Okay. All right, let's get this going again. Okay, so the struggle for peace. So just a quick little reference here, Mallory. Do you want to just read that Genesis 4 story for me, verses 1 through 8?
By the way, I think you're saying Mallory. It's Valerie.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I have a person I work with in the film industry that does costumes that I'm like almost on every show, and her name's Mallory, so that's why I'm getting it wrong. Oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. Sorry.
You see how angry she's getting.
Yes, I know. Thank you for your graciousness, Valerie.
Okay. Chapter 4, 1 through 8. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Again she gave birth to his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Cain told his brother Abel, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So, man, it's just interesting because, you know, I don't really think he wanted to not impress God, you know, with his offering that was not approved, right? But we get to see an instance here. Sorry, I need to bring this verse up myself so I can refer to it. All right. Sorry, guys. A little bit of prep here. Genesis 4. Okay. Anyway. All right, sorry. So Cain, you know, he brings his offering of fruits or whatever it was, and God didn't have regard for it. But then instead of asking the question, okay, well, what can I do that's proper, or, you know, doing what then he discovered is the right way to go about it, he goes into a state of anger and disappointment. And here's the thing, right, is that, you know, he's the one who failed. So whether he's mad at God or mad at himself or both or one or the other, he's mad and upset about his own failure, and he pursues a path that gets him into a situation where he chooses to sin and gives into a serious sin. But, you know, this is how life is. Things happen, and they don't go right, whether it's our own fault or some other outside circumstance. And we have to master the situation so that we can respond properly and not give up our peace, not throw away our peace, to fight for our peace, to struggle for our peace. And so this early story on of the beginnings of mankind, in a sense, you know, Cain and Abel, and how Cain dealt with the situation where, you know, not pursuing God, not leaning on God, not fearing God, all these sorts of things. When you don't do them, they mess things up and they create problems further. So let's read a couple verses now, Valerie. Read 1 Peter chapter 2, 11 through 12. Let's take a look at that.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay.
So something I want to get into here, but yeah, go ahead and read that.
Sorry, I am in modern technology and my phone is loading rather than my
Yeah, no worries. I
Okay.
could read it really. It's super
If
quick.
only I had some Bibles in this room.
I'm good. We're good. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation.
So it's another interesting insight here. So what we see is fleshly lusts, which we're told to abstain from, wage war against our souls. So if they wage war, that's the opposite of what? Of peace, right? So lust, fleshly lusts, are basically identified as a tool of breaking peace because they create a struggle. Like any of us could, it's self-evident once you start thinking about it, right? Because having a bad desire or an unfit desire, inappropriate desire, creates a tension, creates a struggle, creates a little miniature battle that you have to fight in your mind or whatever it might be. But here we're told to abstain, and then it says, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles. Because of your good deeds, they'll observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So same kind of concept here, that in the struggle for peace in your own personal life, there's this requisite that you have to not allow war into your own world. So we have this war going on in our own lives with sin and our behavior and trusting in God and not worrying and not all that sort of stuff. But we have so much control in that I don't think is emphasized just maybe in Christianity in general so much. I think it gets talked about, like obviously we're encouraged, no matter what stripe of Christianity, the majority would have you say that you need to behave righteously, you need to be following Jesus' example and living righteously. And of course, I'm sure there's some people that say that doesn't matter, but whatever. But the importance of that, I think, is maybe a little bit understated in how imperative it is to have the type of life that we want to have, that we believe is available, where we have peace, where, you know, we actually have this kind of Christ-like kind of rising above what the normal struggles of people without hope have, right? Like we have the hope of Christ, the hope of eternal life, and yet it's still very easy to fall into the stress and struggles of everyday life that isn't representative of having the type of promises in our life that we believe we have, right? And it still keeps coming back to this idea that it's our behavior and the things that we do that can break our peace, right? So our own lusts will wage war against our souls, so against our beings maybe. And so we must master our behavior and not give way to lusts which destroy peace. So let's take a look deeper at lust versus peace. Another little passage here for you, Valerie. James 4, 1 through 3.
What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and do not have, so you commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures.
Yes, yes. So lusts, right? Pleasures that you desire that wage war. And it's these improper desires going unfulfilled that have wrong motives going on that cause quarrel and conflicts between people, right? So it's very interesting to see, at least from my looking at this, that lust and bad desires, or improper desires, I should say, have this warlike effect, right? So if we want to be people that are peacemakers, how can we make peace, whether it be in our own lives or in the lives of others that we're trying to mediate for, or within organizations or within even greater structures than that? How are we going to make peace if we as individuals live in a state of war, right? So at least the concept that I get from doing this study is that if we're going to be peacemakers, we need to learn to make peace where we have the most influence and control first, which is in our own individual lives. So don't focus on big aspirational concepts of making peace in these broad, general, world-changing ideas and areas if you don't have peace in your own life, right? So if anyone here, which I'm sure we all can say, there's an area of our lives where we don't experience complete peace. So let's look at what's going on there. Let's examine where the warfare is going on and how we can take control of what's causing that conflict and that tension that breaks our personal peace. 2 Timothy chapter 2.
Now in a large house there are not only gold and silver vessels, but also vessels of wood and of earthenware, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from these things, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every good work. Now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. But refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wronged, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance, leading to the knowledge of truth. And they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil, having been held captive by him to do his will.
Amen. Thank you. So guys, this is kind of where it gets a little bit intense. I want the focus here for us to all be kind of introspective as we look at this passage, because this is kind of like the climax, you might say, of this discovery, I would say, that I've made in Scripture that I wanted to share with you guys. So verse 21, therefore, if anyone cleanses himself of these things, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every work. Cleanses himself of what? Dishonorable stuff going on, right? So it compares it to gold and silver vessels, also wood and earthenware. So if you have useless tools, useless setups, useless structures that are for dishonor going on in your life, it says we need to cleanse ourselves of those things so that we can be a vessel for honor. Sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every good work. Of course, we want those things, but it has a requirement that we need to cleanse ourselves, remove the dishonorable stuff. Continue on, it says, now flee again from youthful lusts. So naive, childish, unrestrained desires that are based on foolishness, maybe, or inexperience. And instead pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. But refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels, so fights, not a peaceful thing. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome. Okay, so must not be someone ready to get into a fight with somebody. But now keep this in mind while I read these things. And envision in yourself, or envision in your mind, or in your own life, or what you imagine a peaceful person to look like, to act like. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, ready to fight, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wronged, and with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition. So think about that, right? Ask yourself the question. Am I quarrelsome? Am I quick to get in a fight, whether it be words or blows? If so, there's something that needs to change. Am I kind to all people? Am I willing to give gracious space to others, even if they offend me, even if they rub me the wrong way? Am I kind to all? If you can say pretty quickly that no, there's definitely people I'm not kind to, whether it's a stripe of people, whether it's a group of people, whether it's a certain type of personality, whatever it might be. If you can't be kind to that person, there you go. There's an area that you can work on to be a peacemaker. able to teach. So this is an interesting one because, you know, we can talk about just the technicality of being a teacher or whatever, but teaching, just as a concept, requires a peaceful approach, because teaching in and of itself requires patience, because people don't learn things all the same, and they don't learn all at the same pace, and they don't learn in the same manners and with the same sharpness. So you might train one person, whether it's at your workplace or whatever it might be, in one task, and they pick it up right away, learn instantly, and boom, you barely had to do anything. You just had to show them a couple things and they picked it up right away. There might be another person and they're making it difficult. Like, how hard is it to get them to grasp the concept? And it's not that they're stupid or bad or something like that, but maybe it takes 3, 4, 5, 10 times the effort for you to teach someone, to convey something to someone, than the person who picks it up right away. And that doesn't say anything bad or good about either of those people. It means, how can you extend yourself and not get upset, not get frustrated, whatever it might be. That's just a way to look at that for this concept here. Patient when wronged, pretty straightforward there. When you get wronged by someone, do you start grinding your teeth and saying swear words under your breath, cursing that person silently in your brain, whatever it might be? Is that stuff that happens almost immediately? Is it a rare occasion? Is it whatever? If you're not patient when wronged, if you're not able to work through an issue with someone and stay calm and give them the benefit of the doubt, not tit for tat, there's something that can be cleansed for the sake of making peace in your life. But yeah, so just as we saw back in Psalm 34 and 1 Peter, when we were reading about lusts, and, well, not so much in Psalm 34, I don't think it mentions lusts, but anyway, the whole idea that having inappropriate desires are a warring phenomenon shows how it's a breaker of peace and how it's something we need to be seriously focused on. So continuing on, getting close to finishing up here, guys. The duty of peacemaking. So I kind of, after going in depth on this on my own time, I've kind of come to the conclusion that peacemaking is not a either or thing. It's not a do it if you like it, do it if you feel like it's your strong suit. You know, it's, some Christians are good at being peacemakers and some aren't. I think peacemaking is part and parcel of what it means to be a Christian. Because if we can't live in peace in our own lives, amongst our peers, within our organizations, it doesn't just negatively impact us individually, because if you're not experiencing the peace of God, then hey, isn't that one of the reasons you would want to be a Christian, is to experience the peace of God in your life? But if you're not having that, what kind of witness does it produce to the world when, you know, people, there's only so many people that are going to be convinced of something purely intellectually. You can tell them the gospel and explain the reason why you would want to become a believer in Christ, and they go, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll do that. A lot of people, it's going to be very much an emotional decision, which is not a wrong thing in any way. People want to have their needs met. They want to have, you know, dreams and aspirations in their life and goals. And I think for a lot of people, they want to have peace in their life. Everybody wants that. Nobody doesn't really want peace unless they're kind of masochistic and whatever. But I think after reading some of these passages that we'll read, you guys will probably agree that it's a duty, that it's something that is a requisite, that it's something that's supposed to be part of the Christian life, not an optional, hope for kind of thing. So let's read this quick passage in Philippians, verse 1 through 7 in chapter 4.
Therefore, my beloved brethren, whom I long to see, my joy and crown in this way, stand firm in the Lord, my beloved. I urge Euodia and I urge
Santiki.
Syntyche to live in harmony in the Lord. Indeed, true companion, I ask you also to help these women who have shared my struggle in the cause of the gospel, together with Clement also and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus.
Thank you. So, again, so imperatives here. I'm going to say that the case can be made that we're commanded to acquire and maintain personal peace by committing to obedience to these commands of God. So now, and this is interesting too, because in the beginning, before we get into this kind of more specific command, there's a real life example of Paul. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to live in harmony in the Lord. What is he doing right there? He's saying, look, guys, be at peace. Don't quarrel. It's not fit, right? And then he goes in to talk about anxiety and peace. And so how many commands do we have here? Verse 4, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say rejoice. So double emphasis. He says it, he says always, and then he says, again, rejoice. So basically, if we're not rejoicing in the Lord pretty perpetually, are we fulfilling this command, right? Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. So your gentle spirit, gentle. Being gentle is in harmony with being peaceful because, hey, violence and war are probably the most obvious opposites of being gentle, right? Verse 6, be anxious for nothing. So if we took off those last two words and all the verse said was be anxious, that would be a command to be anxious, right? But since it says be anxious for nothing, that's essentially a command to not be anxious. Very interesting. I want to talk about this some more, and I have talked about this in a teaching, I think maybe like last year. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and then the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ Jesus. So, very interesting. We are commanded in Scripture, be anxious for nothing. Do not be anxious, essentially, right? But instead, to pray with thanksgiving, requesting things of God so that we can have peace that God is working on our behalf. This is kind of a little sidestep here, but Hannah and I are actually reading a book by a guy named Jordan Peterson right now. You may or may not have heard of him. He's kind of become an internet sensation. But he's a psychologist, and a lot of the stuff he's done is help people straighten their lives out. And really interesting concept is that he works with a lot of people who typically get diagnosed with like mental disorders and things like that. But he's able to cure the mental disorder by just helping the people get some degree of structure and normalcy to their life, which can be as simple as going to bed at the same time every night and getting up at the same time every morning. It's very interesting how making our lives conform to healthy structures create peace, create order, create health. And with that concept in mind, it's really interesting to think of, well, how serious of a matter is it then to obey the commands of God, which we know are for our good and for our health, but not just for things to go well in our lives. Like I think the temptation and the I fall into this all the time, is that we think that obedience to God will result in spiritual happenstance to go better, rather than just thinking obedience to God is going to protect me psychologically, protect my body physically, healthily, because if my psyche isn't damaged with constant anxiety and fear and frustration and self-hatred or anger at the world or whatever it is, those things damage your body through stress. Stress is not good for you, causes inflammation, causes different things to happen in your body that are not good. And it's just very interesting to think about how obeying these commands of God can be very good for your health, right? Rejoicing in the Lord always, and I will say rejoice. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. We don't need to understand how it works, but it's good to know that it works to say no to anxiety and instead say yes to trusting in God, reaching out to God, as Dustin in that verse you give us some elaboration on, to look to him, right? And then the peace of God will protect us, right? Guard our hearts and minds. Pretty amazing. 18 and 31, I just combine these two verses. It says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. And then going further, it says, what shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? So a lot of the things we deal with in life are just our own failure to maintain real peace in our own existence. So we need to make peace, but making peace requires us to have these strategies of thought, strategies of belief, strategies of action, right? So something stressful happens in my life. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to worry, stress, go eat some sugar, go watch a movie and take my mind off of it, play some video games, whatever it might be that isn't really addressing the issue? Or is it I'm supposed to obey what God says and just look to him, rejoice, think of the things that are positive that are going on in my life, remind myself of all my blessings, whatever it might be? Because if we can't make peace in our own lives and in our family situations from what God has given us as tools to do this, how are we going to be able to be peacemakers in the greater scheme of things, right? Like if I don't have peace with me, how am I going to be able to be a peacemaker between two other people if I have war and conflict going on in my own existence? And sorry, Valerie, I'll just read this. This is supposed to say verse 4, 8, and 9, but I just wanted to finish this off, guys, with this is another command. So in the same chapter, the next two verses, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is anything excellence, if there's any excellence, or if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. The things you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So this is firstly mental behavior, and secondly physical behavior, right? Doing the things that Paul has been teaching them about and explaining to them and exemplifying for them. Wants you to do these things, and then the God of peace will be with you. And he starts that off with saying, here's what to think about. Here is what the command is to think about. Think about true things. Think about honorable things. Think about right things. Think pure things, lovely things, things of good reputation, excellent things, things worthy of praise. It doesn't just say think about them once. It says dwell on these things, right? So if we want to make peace in our lives, we have to dwell on things that make us happy, things that make us feel good about the world, things that make us feel good about our lives, feel confident about where we're going, things that bring a cleansing effect to our psyches, you know? If you think about everything negative going on in the world, everything negative or imperfect about your life, how's that going to affect you? Is it going to make you feel better? Think about the good. Think about what's awesome. Think about opportunities. Think about what can happen. So anyways, just want to say let's go and make peace, and let's start in our own lives potentially. So go from now on, sin no more. Don't give in to lusts that war against our soul, improper desires that create conflict and tension, not just in our daily lives of, I want to do this, but I know I shouldn't, but the fact that if you abstain from bad things and invite good things into your behavior, you won't have that tension because you'll feel good. You'll be confident before God. You won't be ashamed. All the good things that come with being a righteous person. So that's all I had to share. So pleasure to be with you guys, and I'm glad to be able to share it. Stop screen share, and yeah, we can just chat on what you guys thought. Anybody? Go ahead, Sergio.
Well, first of all, definitely going to listen to this again because it's so applicable to my life right now. And maybe it would have been good if I heard it 20 years ago. But anyways,
Me too. Yeah.
there's just, there's just so many great points that you made, and and it's amazing how the truths of Scripture just intertwine, and it's like if you want to know the truth about one thing, it connects to so many other different things. The scriptures you shared were, scriptures I've read many times, but it's amazing how if you just hear it at the right time or in the right frame of mind, it can make such a difference. And the ones in Second Timothy are especially powerful to me, where it talked about, not being quarrelsome, being kind, be able to teach, patient when wronged. That's I need to be more patient when I'm wronged. And early when I heard you teaching, I think it was about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, something like that. You were teaching, and you mentioned Proverbs 3, that there was just a lot of great stuff in that particular proverb. And so I went back through it, and I think it was in my reading later, so it just really hit me. And some of the verses that I read that I've really been coming back to on a regular basis in the last few weeks came to my mind when you were teaching. In particular, it says in chapter 3, verse 2, length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. And then it says that this basically the same thing like 2 or 3 times in that chapter. And the verse 3 is the verse that I've really been coming back to a lot, 3 and 5. And verse 3 says, do not let kindness and truth leave you. And so if you don't let kindness and truth leave you, verse 4 gives another benefit of doing that. But part of that is verse 2. It's going to give you length of days, years of life, and peace. And
Yep. So it's the same concept.
I shared those verses with my wife and with my daughters several times, and I'm like, that's it. We're going to practice kindness and truth. And it's amazing how many times we have not done kindness and truth, especially kindness. And it's funny when my youngest daughter gets in trouble, she's like, that's not kindness and truth. I didn't expect it to be this process, that we have to continually come back to and practice. I thought, I'm just going to preach it, and that's the way it's going to be from now on. And
it's difficult.
It's growing up, that it's not something I really experienced a lot of, but it's amazing how these two things are directly tied to your peace. If you don't have kindness,
you won't have peace.
I talk about truth also, but I think there's a reason why kindness is mentioned first. Not that truth is not important; it's extremely important. Um, but I think there's a reason why, and it kind of reminds me of John, where it says grace and truth. Also, there's something kind of related there, I think maybe. But anyways, I can go on for a long time. Those verses in Timothy were amazing, and yeah. Anyways, I've probably already started rambling, but thank you.
It's good, man. No, exactly what you're saying. Like, I know I'm going to be reading the Bible like in a different light going forward after having done this study, because it's like crazy how you just, like you say, you've been reading verses and this aspect has never popped out, that it's like, holy crap, my behavior immediately and directly affects how I'm going to experience life, whether it's going to be positive or negative. So super cool. Laura, you guys were next.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson, for putting that together. It's really good stuff. I really enjoyed kind of the way you, just kind of dug into it. And it's like, if we're going to be, seeking to be peacemakers and be called the sons of God, we need to align our actions to be working towards that. And I think we all know, we've all been around some of those people that are not peacemakers, right? They're always just out looking to stir something up. They're always just looking to kind of, and it doesn't have to be necessarily like a physical war, but a lot of times people just want to stir up problems. And it's like, if we don't want to be a part of that and we want to be deliberate in making peace, we're going to have to focus on some things. And some of the things you brought up along lines of, not seeking our own selfish lust and that type of thing. That's when you look at why someone's stirring stuff up, it's because they've got some sort of issue why they're wanting to bring something about themselves. They're not looking at focusing on other people and good things. So great stuff, Jackson. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, that makes sense, that if you have an agenda, that's that desire, right? The quarreling, warring of the soul. I think Dustin was next. Go ahead, dude.
So I have I'd like to, I don't know if it's possible to add anything to what we've already done.
Do your thing. Do your thing. Yeah.
I like to add 2 cents, and then I'd like to ask you kind of a more direct question, because I feel like we've been dancing around the issue a little bit. But the first thing I want to do is just kind of want to situate, I think for us, the words of Jesus kind of in their context, because when Jesus says that, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. This is in a culture in the first century to where there are a lot of Jews that, at least the more conservative ones, were not very happy with military occupation, or not very happy with Pilate, or not very happy with Herod, and they were prone to violent revolt. Okay. And there were some Christians, and here's the thing, if you were to think of yourself, what was the mindset of Saul of Tarsus? These people that thought, okay, God is holy, and we're supposed to be holy as God is holy, and sometimes God, being the Holy One, takes his vengeance out on those people that are unholy. Think of like Elijah on Mount Carmel, or Phineas in the book of Numbers, or even the Maccabean revolt. There are some Jews that would look upon those particular quote unquote heroes of the Jewish faith and say the way that we deal with compromise is by taking out the sword and getting rid of them. And so that's how Saul took it. And they thought that's what it meant to be the people of God. But it's interesting here that when Jesus says, actually, if you are a peacemaker, then you will be called sons of God, that deliberately speaks against that violent revolutionary tendency. Think of all the praising that happened at the death of Jesus because of, the other violent criminals that were on the cross, or the person that was swapped with Jesus, Barabbas, who is specifically called an insurrectionist in the book of Mark. So those sort of people were out there ripe for revolt. So it's just interesting that that the comment would have been pretty radical in Jesus' time, okay? To where that was one of the things that even Saul, who changed his name to Paul, had to learn. Okay, because Saul was not a peacemaker. He was one of those that sought to bring about and enforce the holiness of God through the sword. And Paul repented of that, and you can see that in his letter. So that's one thing. So my question to you actually is kind of the more, I don't want to say like the pointed edge part there, but can you make a comment on just the teachings of Jesus, and even you can look at Paul and Christian nonviolence, or even pacifism, or I would even go so far as to say military involvement. How can a Christian or how should a Christian live in the midst of all of these options out there, while still being a peacemaker as a requirement for sonship, membership in the family of God? So I know you've kind of danced around the topic there. I'm asking you directly, and especially in light of what Matthew later says in 26:52, where Jesus says, "All who take up the sword will perish by the sword."
That's a pretty heady question there. Well, my perspective in general has, well, when I first became a Christian, like, when was that? That would have been like 15 years ago, 16 years ago. I was pretty heavily just like, seemed common sense to me that violence and war and aggression don't make sense. They're not really compatible with kind of a Christian behavior format. The one complication that has got me since is the concept of protection of others. So the what if isms, you know what I mean? And getting into the whole concept of like national defense and stuff like that. I probably take more of like a Jehovah's Witness kind of perspective, where just non-participation and let the world do what the world does kind of thing. I'm not quite at the stance where I would believe it to be a condemnation-worthy offense if someone were to say join the military and work in intelligence or something like that behind a computer. That's a sticky discussion from my perspective. Frontline people killing each other kind of Christian soldier, I'm not too sure about. I don't see the harmony there of action and teaching of the Bible and how that could be a suitable employment. Like nobody would say it's okay for a Christian woman to be a pole dancer for Christ. You know what I mean? And so in the same way, how can you be an avenger or an aggressor for a state for Christ either, right? So I'll leave that at that, because that can be a tough discussion. But my main sticking issue personally has been one of self-defense against pure evil kind of things. Like if I discovered, like say I wake up at the what if isms like I'm talking about, right? Say at 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear a banging noise and I wake up and find out there's some dude that broke into the house and he's like physically attacking my daughter in her bed. What then, right? Is it righteous behavior for me to say, excuse me, sir, I'm going to kindly request that you leave my daughter alone and exit my house peacefully, right? So that is the type of situation where I think there's a tough little gray area on when it comes to aggression, violence, and non-kindness, because there is evil in the world. There are people that are just not going to respond to gentle, kind, non-violent, non-controlling actions that I think need to be stopped, because I don't, in a situation like that, I wouldn't consider it to be the greater good to show compassion and grace to the dude attacking my daughter. I think it would be the greater good to relieve my daughter from the damage and let the aggressor be put out of being able to continue aggressing. So that's where I stand on all that sort of stuff. So I don't think I'm going to go any further than that, because we don't want to get into like a political discussion here. But I hope that satisfies your question. All right, but let's see. We got a couple more raised hands. I think Dean was next. Go ahead, Dean.
Sergio, you were mentioning where is that found in Scripture? The kindness and truth. I want to jot that down for my personal notes here.
It's Proverbs chapter 3,
Okay.
verses 1 and 2 lead up to it, but it's specifically in verse 3.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see. There was another hand raised, I believe. Sergio, yeah, go ahead again, dude.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I meant to mention earlier, because all of chapter 3 is just loaded with all kinds of great stuff, and where is it? Just read it. I'm sorry, I just read it. Hold on, give me 1 second.
No worries. What Bible book are you talking about? Chapter 3, Proverbs or Peter?
Yeah,
or?
Proverbs chapter 3. Oh, well, I'm looking in chapter 2. No wonder I'm not seeing it. Okay, here we go. Verse 31. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways. And at first, you can read that verse and think, well, that's dumb. Who's going to envy a violent person? But as I think about it, you know, I can't speak for all men, but as myself, who are the heroes that we look up to in our culture?
Yes.
Whether it's
Superheroes
people
beating up the bad guys and killing them.
and you know, I think I don't know if this is the best place to talk about it, but it was a great question that Dustin posed. I'm not going to go into it because I think maybe this is not the best place. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. It's an important question to think about. And I do think that
I have an interesting thought that I'll follow up on, so go ahead. Yeah.
I do think that it's easy to go to one extreme or another. There's times far too often, whether it's with my words or the tone that I use or physically, where it seems right, or maybe even it appeals to my pride. Maybe I'm not going to let somebody talk to me like that. I'm going to get in their face and I'm going to tell them how it is. I don't think that's what Jesus did with the Pharisees. He spoke the truth to them. We can't hear his tone because it's written down, but even then, you don't read any curse words or any descriptions of him out of control defending himself. So anyways, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that verse because I think in our culture, whether it's movies, political figures, sports, violence is something that is glorified, and far too often, that's the extreme that I go to. It's not very often that the other extreme of not protecting somebody is glorified.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what would be the right way to do it, but I know if somebody was attacking my daughters, I think I would become violent. And I know God.
Well,
is violent. God is the one that's supposed to have the wrath too. So I don't know.
well, and it's interesting on that subject because I don't consider acting defensively on behalf of like a family member to be something where it necessitates violent aggression. You know what I mean? Like to restrain someone from doing harm isn't necessarily aggressive, right? So it's a tough subject, but the verse that you mentioned, do not envy a man of violence and do not choose any of his ways. So it's interesting. It's very cool because it implies that, you know, why do we have envy, right? We envy because people have things that we do not, right? Even if you're talking about things that they didn't earn or acquire, like they were born beautiful or super strong, whatever it was, you could envy that sort of stuff because they have it, you don't, right? So envying a man of violence probably wouldn't be because you envy his violence. You envy his ability to be violent. You envy what it is that he's acquired by being violent, right? And then it says, do not choose any of his ways, meaning don't adopt his tactics for acquiring what he's acquired because they're not good, right? And yeah, it's really interesting. It ties right into that whole where do your fights and quarrels come from? Is it not the desires unfulfilled that you have that are wrongly placed with the wrong motives, right? That sort of thing. It's pretty cool. I only see Dean, so yeah, go ahead, Dean. And hey, Aaron, good to have you with us.
Talking about protecting family members or loved ones, I think it would be ungodly not to. That's just my personal opinion. I think it would be ungodly and unmanly for a person not to properly protect their loved ones.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, you know, you can make the argument, well, what if I were perfectly obeying God and I prayed and a wall could fall over on the guy or something? You know, so what ifism?
Well, that protecting them could entail a lot of different things. Certainly going to God in the situation, but I think it would be totally irresponsible for a person not to protect their loved ones. Period.
Dustin, you've opened a can of worms. What do you got to say?
I'm not opening a can of worms. I'm legitimately trying to take seriously the words of Jesus in this, and I want to encourage us to really think seriously that that the American way sometimes does not line up with the teachings of Jesus, and we need to default to the teachings of Jesus, because I cited a very specific example to where Jesus was wrongfully being arrested and wrongfully being attacked, okay? Which means, you know, in that hypothetical situation, yeah, people would have tried to justify protecting their friends, and Jesus condemned it. He says, don't do it. He says, put away your swords, okay? So the teachings of Jesus there very specifically is to not violently respond when someone is wrongfully being attacked, okay? And then you look at other things in the New Testament, how martyrdom is praised, okay? And you're not a martyr if you go down fighting, okay? It's a nonviolent issue. You know, we're called to have perseverance, and we're called to endure. And again, you can't be a peacemaker with a gun or a sword, okay? So it's those sort of things. So I'm trying to, again, encourage us to look at those things and things that Jesus talked about. You know, and there's another example in Matthew 12 where it says, like, the Pharisees conspired to kill Jesus, and what did he do? He withdrew. He ran away. That's one way to resolve it, is to remove yourself from the situation. Okay. So, and I'm not trying, you know, and the thing is, it always kind of comes down to that, you know, that what if situation. If someone breaks into your house, like, I'm not you know, let's be honest. Like, how often is that going to happen in our community? It's a 1 in a million situation. Okay. I don't want to focus on that. Let's be real. And I think, Jackson, I want to praise you because your entire scope of this has been extremely practical, which is what we need. Okay. But these are real issues. Okay. because there are some Christians that say, no, we need to be willing to take up, weapons against our aggressors. And we have, the Crusades in the Christian past that would agree with that. There are some Christians who say, no, the Crusades are a terrible blight on Christian history. There's some other Christians who say, no, we should do that. So the point is, there's not even an agreement within Christianity as to what we should do on this, which is why I'm trying to say, look, Jesus said we're to love our enemies. You can't love your enemies and shoot them. Okay. Jesus said we're to be peacemakers. Okay. Jesus said to put away the sword. If you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. Anyway, so I'm just.
If you want to, yeah, well, no, and I'm glad you're talking about this because I think there's a deep connection between the path I went on and what I shared about and this, because if you want to uproot that mentality that you're talking about of believing that taking up arms and being violent and that being an okay default in many different situations, societally or whatever, or personally, those can only come from you not having integrated and internalized all the things that I tried to talk about. That, like if you have war going on inside and you're okay with it and you live with it, then you can see how war is normal in other circumstances, right? Like you can see how tension and fight and argument and all that sort of stuff and battle is okay because you live in a state of battle, right? And you think fighting is a solution because when you come up against a problem, instead of obeying God by following the directives we've been given to acquire victory or peace, you just grit your teeth and battle and do whatever it is that you do that isn't in harmony with the way God prescribed to solve problems, right? And the interesting thing too, which you made me think of, is there is a big rift in Christianity, because not only from just like the general war violence position of should Christians be in the military, should we be okay with that sort of thing, there's the even deeper down in the system of, say, America or any other nation or whatever, is should Christians be supporting things like legalizing morality, or you know what I mean? Like, what's the word? It's not legalizing. It's it's legislating morality, right? Because what is that other than saying you have to act this way, otherwise violence is going to come after you, right? That's what it boils down to, is that if you make a bad behavior illegal with the threat of violence, then, and Christians support that, is that being violent, right? Like, should we be peacefully trying to convince people to follow the ways of Christ, or threat of violence trying to get people to follow the ways of Christ, right? Very interesting discussion to have there. And it's a difficult thing because, like, oh my gosh, I was watching a debate between somebody for an organization for legalizing marijuana and a dude who's like a hardcore kind of conservative Christian guy, very, very, very much opposed to legalizing marijuana of any kind. And they both have very different perspectives. They both have backgrounds and histories medically and lifestyle that led them to believe so strongly in their different views. I think one is probably more science-based and one is maybe more emotional-based. But it's just so interesting to see the desire to exert force from the Christian community, wanting to exert force on the world to try and get their way, right? And you try and do it through politics, and I think it's a bad idea. I subscribe to the position that, just as I tried to kind of convey in this message, that you start here first. Anytime you want to create change, you start here first, because you need to be the type of person that is in harmony with what you're trying to put out in the world, right? What you're trying to convince other people to adopt, you need to have adopted, right? Like, if you don't act in harmony with what you say you believe and what you think other people should believe, how are you going to convince other people to do that? It doesn't make sense, right? So anyway, just
Well,
all over the place.
respond to that just quickly, and then we can move on. 'Cause it's as I'm sitting here watching the chat, it's very clear that we're not on the same page with this whole thing, and it's going to take some more dialogue. That's okay. That's fine. That's good. Because like I said, this is it's gonna come back up again when Jesus says, "Love your enemies." So, but you talk about how people are going to respond based kind of on their own presuppositions, and I pointed out that many of the Jews in the first century were inclined to revolt. Okay, that was what they were doing. They were inclined to looking for any opportunity they can to to attack the Herodians or to attack the Roman forces, or to want to join in military revolt. And so when Jesus is going and getting arrested, the inclination of his disciples, I mean, heck, one of them was a zealot, a violent revolutionary. Okay, their inclination was to do that. And Jesus rebuked it. He says, no, don't do it. He taught against that because that's been his teaching and his example throughout the entirety of his career. And so just because it's our inclination doesn't mean it's right. Okay. So, and again, I want to encourage us to consider whether we are adopting the teachings of Jesus in those particular instances, because I think that's a pertinent example. Like it's the only example I know of protecting somebody, and I think we need to kind of consider too whether our ultimate goal is the preservation of life, because Jesus says if you want to save this life, you're going to lose it, not violently defend it. So that's it. I just want to encourage us to look to the teachings of Jesus on this. I'm not going to be able to settle it all, and we'll have some other conversations about it as well. But I do think Jesus does teach on this issue, and we can't conform to those teachings by ignoring them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that wraps it up pretty good, because that's all I wanted to really inject into people's minds, is the concept that if you want to have harmony and spread of, if you want to have the spread of Christ's teachings, God's commands in the world, you have to adopt them yourself and make your own life an example of the peaceful result of integrating peaceful behaviors into your life, right? If you're not a peaceful person by nature, you can't be a peacemaker, you can't promote the peace teachings of Christ, whatever it is. There needs to be a self-integration of what it is to be peaceful if there's going to be peace. So if peace will spread. Anyway, I'll quit recording and we can kind of close this out.